comfy. All right, 3 in a row, you ready? 1, 2, 3. I'm gonna count it, that's as good as it's gonna get. G'day guys and girls, it's Benjamin Harley here. Very excited because today is the day I finally launch my YouTube channel. This is something I've been thinking about doing for ages, but just never really got around to actually taking the time to make these sorts of videos. But I figured I'm gonna quit putting it off. I'm finally gonna put something together. The thing I get the most DMs about on Instagram is definitely stuff relating to my drone shots. I always get asked, what drone am I using? What am I using to edit? Basically people wanting to know how I get my drone shots to look the way they do. So I figured what better way to kick off this channel than to do a full edit tutorial of one of my favorite drone top downs that I've shot recently. So this is my first ever YouTube video, and if you like what you see, it would mean so much to me if you hit that subscribe button so you can stay tuned for further videos I plan on doing in the future. And if you don't already, give me a follow on Instagram and give me some feedback there. It would be much appreciated. But enough mucking around. I'm going to show you guys how I took a photo that looked like this and turn it into a photo that looks like this. Let's get stuck in. Alrighty, so this is the raw image I'm going to be working with today. I have given it a quick 4:5 crop already, otherwise known as the Instagram crop, but let's move on to the basics tab and get stuck into the actual edit. So in the basics tab here, unless it's really obvious that it needs to be skewed warmer or colder, I often don't even touch the temperature or the tint on the first pass. I like to play with the colors individually a bit further on, and then at the very end I might decide if it needs to be slightly warmer or slightly cooler. But for a shot like this, where I think the white balance is pretty spot on, I'm gonna leave that for now. The same as the tint, I don't think this really needs to be more pink or more green. It is, however, a little bit dark. So I'm gonna increase the exposure. Maybe, I don't wanna overdo it because obviously you don't want it to lose all those details. I might leave it at 0.7 for now. I think that looks pretty good. Contrast, again, I don't touch it on the first pass because you can do more specific contrast edits later on. So I'm gonna leave that for now. Highlights, this image doesn't have any areas that are super blown out or anything, as you can see by me sliding it wildly left and right. So I'm only going to turn those down a little bit, and the same for the shadows. This image doesn't have too many shadowy bits, it's mainly this top part up here, but I kind of like having those bits shadowy. If I bring it up like that, I don't love being able to see all the details in the whole image. I think it looks cool having that little bit of dark mystery shrouding the top part of the photo. So I'm going to leave that pretty dark. I might even just leave it at 0 actually. Quick tip, if you ever just want to revert something back to 0, just instead of having to slide it and actually get it on the 0 like that, you can actually just go over to the word on the left and double click it, and it will revert back to 0. I'm just gonna I generally like to do a rough +20 for the whites and -20 for the blacks, just to make it a little bit more contrasty, and then see how we go from there. So I'm gonna do that now. I think that looks pretty good. I might even go a little bit darker on this, maybe -30 for now. I think I like the darks in this one. Alrighty, so this bottom section here, I don't play around with this as much. Texture is something I very rarely use, if I'm honest. I know some people like to jam it up and bring more detail in, however that's not my style. If anything, I will drag that down to like -5. The same with the clarity. This is another slider I feel like a lot of people, when they're new to editing, will just jam it all the way to the right like this, and then end up with a really just mechanical looking photo. I really don't like that look, so again, if I am going to touch clarity, I'll often slide it down a bit just to make it a bit more dreamy, a bit more mystical, for lack of a better word. Dehaze, however, I will bring up just a bit. I find it brings the colors out a little bit more. I know it's a bit counterintuitive to turn down the clarity and turn up the dehaze. Like I said, there's no right or wrong way to edit your photos. This is just the style that I've come up with. Vibrance, I'm going to turn up slightly just to make the brighter parts of the image pop a little bit more, but the overall saturation I think I'm going to leave for now. I'm pretty happy with the saturation. And as you can see, even with just a few minor adjustments in the basics tab, if I hit the slash key, is it forward or backslash? I can never, if it's that, if it's leaning that, is that forward? Whichever slash is underneath the backspace key, you can always press that to get a quick little before and after of your image. And even just looking at that now, it's already looking a lot better. It's a lot more inviting, a little bit warmer, just a bit more dynamic, but we've still got a long way to go with this. So I'm gonna close the basics tab for now and move on to the tone curve. Now the tone curve is a very powerful and very precise way of adjusting the contrast in your image. It's why I don't really play with the contrast slider too much at the start. I prefer to be a bit more specific in the tone curve panel here. Let's have a look. So I'm just gonna open up the tone curve panel now. And at the moment, the tone curve is in a dead straight line. However, by clicking this line, I'm gonna add some extra points. And then so the points on the line will refer to which part of the image you're editing. I didn't word that very well, but I can show you what I mean. So this bottom dot here is gonna be changing the darker parts of the image, and the higher dot here is gonna be changing the brighter parts of the image. I'm just gonna undo that because it looks ridiculous. I'm just gonna drag this down ever so slightly. Even that's a bit too much. And then just up a tiny bit here. And you can see I'm just sort of drawing it into a very rough S shape, and that's where the name S-curve comes from. Often I like to do the S-curve, but then turn the very white parts down and the very black parts up, just so I'm not losing any details in the really bright or really dark parts of the image. If you ever want to check what your individual adjustments are doing to the image without doing an entire before and after, you can just click this little toggle in the top left of all the panels here, and it will show you the difference that just that adjustment has made. And as you can see, just by adding that tone curve, it has made the image a bit darker, a little bit more moody, just a little bit more in keeping with my editing style. It has, however, made the image a little bit too dark for my liking. So I'm gonna go back to the basics panel, just turn that up, maybe just to like +1, and turn those highlights down a tiny bit. This is very important. Don't be afraid to go back to the basics panel and make adjustments as you edit. Don't be like, I've done the basics now, it's done, let's move on, because the adjustments you make later will end up affecting the photo in different ways. So I'm always popping back to the basics panel and be like, actually now it's a bit too dark, now the shadows are a bit too dark, or now the highlights are peaking. So don't be afraid to jump back up and redo the edits you made at the start. Alrighty, we're gonna move along to the HSL tab. HSL stands for Hue, Saturation, and Luminance. Basically what it means is the hue is changing the shade of the color, the saturation, how strong that color is, and luminance, how bright or dark that color is. Pretty self-explanatory. I'll show you what I'm gonna do here. I'm gonna go over to the hue. This darker patch of sand in the middle here, it has a slight yellowy, almost greenish tinge to it that I don't love. I want to bring in that warm color into the sand, so I'm just going to slide the orange slider a little bit to the left, and maybe the yellow slider as well. And you can see just with that one little adjustment, it's gotten rid of that green tint that was in the sand and given it a much warmer, more inviting feel. Green, there's not really much green in this image, so sometimes I'll just grab a color and wildly slide it to see what it's affecting, but there's very little green in this image, so I'm just going to leave that for now. Aqua, however, will be a big one because that's the color. You can decide if you want more of a deep purpley blue or more of a tealy greeny blue. I quite like the tealy blue color, but not too much, so I'm just going to slide that down, maybe like -10. The same for this blue. And again, purple and magenta, there's not really any colors of that in this image, so I'm gonna leave those. The saturation, I am gonna turn the saturation up a little bit for the orange. I don't wanna go too much, because obviously you don't want it looking like that. But I think maybe just like +30 to make that sand really pop. I don't really want the yellow to come through as much, so I might even turn the saturation for the yellow down. I want more of that darker orangey color rather than that yellow. Aqua and blue, I'm going to turn the saturation down a tiny bit just to make sure the water doesn't look too fake or too blue. I think I like that. And luminance, I'm going to turn the luminance up of that orange just to make that sand pop even more. I think that looks pretty good. I might even turn the luminance up of the water a touch as well, just to make sure that's really jumping out. I quite like that. And we'll just do a quick before and after of the HSL tab. It's not a crazy big difference, but the main thing I wanted to get here is that warm, inviting color in the darker parts of the sand, and I think I was able to do that here. So we're gonna move it on to color grading. A common technique you might use in a photo like this is to make your highlights a bit warmer and your shadows a bit cooler. Just a nice way of adding in a bit of contrast to the image. However, I think this image already has that vibe to it, so I'm just gonna have a bit of a play around and see how it looks. I'm gonna drag up a little bit of orange in the highlights here, not too much, that's starting to look a bit weird. Just a tiny bit to warm that up. I think about there looks pretty good. Midtones I'm not going to bother with for this one. I'm just going to see how it looks with some blue. You know what, even as soon as I start to bring in some slight blue to the shadows, I don't love the hue it's giving to the whole image. So I think I'm actually going to leave the shadows for now. I don't want them any cooler. They've already got quite a strong blue tint to them. I do think it was good to bring out a little bit of orange in the sand here, but that's pretty much all I'm going to do for color grading. Detail. Now this is another thing I do like to play around with a little bit, but not go too overboard. Not a lot of people know you can do this. I'm going to show you a quick tip. A lot of people think you just slide the sharpening amount up and down to change it, which obviously you can do. However, I find there are certain things that I do and don't want sharpened. So if you click here where it says masking, hold the Alt key. As you can see, the whole image is going basically white, and slide that along. What it's doing is the white parts are what is going to be affected by the sharpening tool. So I'm going to slide that right down because I only want the bits I was talking about. So now, as you can see, that waterline and the rocks at the top are going to be affected. I can slide this sharpening up and down. As you can see, it's not affecting the sand and that stuff as much, but it is making the details that I want to make sharper. Lens corrections, I don't generally muck around with this for my drone shots. I'm pretty happy with the way they come out as it is. Same as transform, this would be where I would go if I needed to change the configuration, if the photo was a bit crooked, or if I wanted to squish it together. You can go to aspect to stretch it out or squash it like that. However, I'm pretty happy with the layout and the composition of this shot as it is, so I don't really feel the need to do anything in the transform tab. Effects, the only effect I ever really do is sometimes a very slight vignette. I might even maybe just like -5, a barely noticeable change, but I think that's all this image needs. And calibration, again, is something I personally don't play around with too much. It's another way of playing around with the shadows and the colors and stuff, but I feel like with all the other tabs above, that's where I do my color editing. Feel free to have a bit of play around with that tab though and see what changes you can make to your images at home. Alrighty, so we've gone through all the basic tabs in Lightroom now. I'm pretty happy with how this image is looking so far. However, I'm just gonna add a few last minute tweaks just to make the image pop a little bit more. And I'm gonna do that with some graduated and some radial filters. I'll show you what I mean right now. So I'm pretty happy with how this image is looking so far. If I do a quick before and after, you can see it's a bit brighter, it's a bit more dynamic, it's just popping off the screen a little bit more. However, I think we can still make this image pop even more with the use of some graduated and some radial filters. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, I'll show you right now. So, you can go up to this top part here, you'll see radial filter, the little circle here. Click that. I'm gonna zoom out a little bit, you'll see why I'm doing this in a second. And if you happen to know where the sun was positioned when you were taking a shot, that's great. If you don't, you can often just look at where the shadows are falling in your image and figure it out. However, for this image, I remember the sun was coming from this side here. So I'm just gonna drag this circle over maybe about half the image like that. Now, if I hit the O key, you can toggle this red stuff on and off to see what areas are being affected by this. Another quick tip you might not have known, if you go up to the top left here and just give it a double click, it will perfectly zoom back in to full screen your edit instead of having to muck around pressing Control plus and Control minus to get it perfect. Just a quick double tap there will bring it back to full screen. So the radial filter will basically only be affecting the parts of the image that are in red here, and it's going to gradually taper the effects off. That's why, as you can see in the top right here, the red is a lot stronger than right on the border of the circle here. You can change how intense or how gradual that feathering is just by sliding this around. As you can see, if I move it to the right, it's a lot more gradual, the fade off, and it's not as noticeable a difference. However, if I slide it all the way to the left, you can see it's a very abrupt end to the graduated filter here, sorry, the radial filter. And I would never edit a photo like this personally. I don't know why you would ever need such a definite amount of feathering, but the option's there. I'm gonna bring this up to maybe about 75. And I'm gonna press O to toggle that. And what I'm gonna be changing, I'm gonna be increasing the exposure and the warmth and adding a bit of haze. You can see the effect that has on the image. I might bump that up to, oh, that might be a bit much. Maybe about like that. I like to do around about 15 warmth, sometimes even a little bit of pink, but obviously you don't want to overdo it. You don't want the photo looking like that. Maybe just like that. And dehaze, I'm actually going to drag to the left. I quite like the effect of having that hazy, mystical sun beaming in on your photo, so that's why I do this. I might leave that at around -35. Could even go a little bit more actually, maybe up like that. And then once you're happy, press that. I'm then going to go to a graduated filter. It's basically the same sort of thing as the radial filter, except it's a straight line instead of a circle. Drag that across like this. Now, one difference you'll notice between the graduated filter and the radial filter, there's no feathering slider to change how abrupt the fade off is. Instead, you actually change the lines itself. The further the back line is away from the front line is how gradual the fade off will be. If I pull this out, you can see it's a very gradual fade. If I bring it nice and close, it's very abrupt. I'm gonna leave it pretty spaced out. I think I want it like that. You can probably guess what I'm going to do with this. I'm going to do the complete opposite to what I did for the graduated filter in the top right. So I'm going to cool it down a bit, maybe even turn the exposure down and add a bit of dehaze. I like the darkening to be a bit more subtle than the brightening. I just think it makes more sense to have the sun making parts of the image super bright, but it doesn't make as much sense for the opposite corner to be super dark. So you just want it very gradual so the audience doesn't really realize what you're doing, but it's enough to make the image pop a bit more. Now at any stage, if you go down to the left here where it says history, this is every adjustment we've made to this image so far. You can scroll through and see all the stuff we've done. If you ever want to see something that you can't just toggle on and off, you can just go back to before you added these adjustments. So here is where I added the radial filter. If I go to the one step before that, it's going to show me what this image looked like without those filters. So that's without the graduated filters. And that's with. And can you see how just with these minor adjustments, it just makes the image pop so much more. It gives the image so much more life, so much more depth. And you know what, guys? That's it. That's pretty much all the editing I would do for a shot like this. Let's have a quick look at the before and after now. Here's the before, a little bit flat, a little bit dark, not really jumping off the screen. And now you can see it's just a lot more dynamic. It's just got a lot more oomph. It's much more the type of shot that's gonna make people scrolling through their feed be like, damn, that guy's a good drone photographer. I'm gonna smash that like button. If I was doing my entire process, I would actually bring this photo over to Photoshop just to clean it up a little bit. For instance, I don't love some of these footprints. Maybe a couple of these rocks could be done without. I might even get rid of the tire marks from the vehicles that drive on the sand here, but I'll save that for another day because I feel like this tutorial has gone on long enough. If you would be interested in seeing how I clean up an image in Photoshop, let me know in the comments below and I can make a follow-up video to this, a sequel if you will, on the final touches I would do in Photoshop, but that was 95% of the edit done right here in Lightroom. Thanks so much for sticking with me, guys. I know that was a pretty long video. Hopefully you guys got something out of it. Hopefully you learnt something and you've now got some fun new techniques you can implement into your own photos. If you found this video at all helpful, please give it a like, give me a subscribe, follow me on Instagram, all that fun stuff. I'm keen to keep making more videos like this, so I really hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks for sticking around and I'll see you guys in the next one.